Every human cell is an open system, requiring a constant stream of nutrients, oxygen, and external signals to function. We can trace this biological continuity up through the complex organ networks it builds, and eventually out to the scale of a person navigating a modern city. But we rarely treat this continuity as a single reality. Instead, our health systems are structurally fragmented, assigning cellular pathology to internal medicine, distress to psychiatry, and environmental conditions to public policy. Dr. Bichara Sahale's framework provides a map for reunifying these silos. It details the precise pathways through which the external environment is physically transduced into our inner biology. This suggests that achieving health is impossible while treating downstream pathology in isolation from the organism's structural coupling to its niche. Modern medicine focuses heavily on pathogenesis, the specific factors that cause a disease to start. However, there is a distinct biological requirement for the actual completion of repair, a process that is often overlooked. At its center is a fulcrum representing the exposure-repair balance, the primary mechanism determining whether a body heals or declines. We will build this architecture from the ground up, starting with the microscopic requirements of the cell. This reveals that chronic disease is frequently a state of stalled healing, locked in place by friction between the organism and its environment. At level 1, we find salugenesis, the internal biology of healing completion. Healing begins with the cell danger response. When mitochondria detect a chemical, physical, or biological threat, the cell halts its standard metabolism to prioritize defense and survival. This triggers an ordered sequence. The organism must move from inflammation to contain the threat, through proliferation to rebuild tissue, and finally to differentiation and the reintegration of normal function. If the cell lacks metabolic energy, or if the danger signal persists, this cycle stalls. The healing process remains locked in the initial inflammatory phase. Chronic inflammation, then, is not necessarily a biological error. It is often a stalled phase of salugenesis, awaiting the metabolic resources required to move toward completion. Levels 2 and 3 bridge the gap between the cell and the outside world. The body functions as a dynamic regulatory ecology where these systems interpret the environment. This is the process of transduction. Social and environmental conditions, such as chronic uncertainty or threat, are converted into biological signals via the HPA axis and the autonomic nervous system. Keeping these systems in a state of chronic vigilance creates a cumulative metabolic cost known as allostatic load. Because bioenergetic resources are finite, energy diverted to systemic defense is energy stripped away from cellular repair and DNA maintenance. All these stressors in our environment act as literal biological friction, physically constraining the cell's ability to rebuild. Moving to level 5, we shift from the inner engine of repair to salugenesis, the outer field of health-generating resources. This level is defined by the affordance field, the material and social conditions that make health-supporting actions structurally possible, safe, and repeatable. Clinical advice often focuses on behavior change, but if a patient's local affordance field involves food insecurity or unsafe work conditions, their capacity to enact that change is structurally disabled. Internal cellular rebuilding requires external safety, nutrition, and time. The body cannot complete its repair cycle without the support of the niche. True health is not solely a private choice. It is a relational achievement dependent on the surrounding field. The architecture is unified by the balance between exposure and repair. Throughout the life course, a person faces an exposure field consisting of physical, chemical, and digital stressors. These are balanced against restorative opportunities, the essential conditions of sleep, nutrition, and social connection needed to offset that burden. The buffer between these forces is the restorative margin. These are the reserves of energy, safety, and time that allow a system to absorb a disturbance without collapse. Disease emerges when cumulative exposures chronically exceed these restorative margins. At level 6, economic, technological, and ecological systems dictate the fundamental conditions of the niche. When these systems normalize preventable harm, they create structural violence, forcing the body to absorb the cost of systemic failures. We often praise the resilience of individuals who thrive under these conditions. However, from a biological perspective, we are often asking bodies to adapt to preventable, toxic circumstances rather than addressing the source of the harm. Treating a disease without addressing the structural conditions of the niche merely manages the symptoms of a broader systemic failure. A threat at level 6 cascades down the architecture, stalling the healing cycle at level 1, while repair at level 1 requires the affordances provided at level 5. This creates a new evaluative standard for medicine, policy, and technology, the Life Master question. We must ask whether an intervention expands or reduces the structural capacities required for life within the web of life. The goal is a civilization where healing is not blocked by preventable burden, and where the biological margins for health are restored. True health is the structurally supported,